I'm Nima Rajan. Many provinces are keeping students out of schools as the Omicron variant spreads across the country, but not in BC, Alberta, and Saskatchewan. Officials in BC and Alberta argue that virtual learning presents its own risk to children, saying it jeopardizes their mental health. The return to classes comes as COVID-19 cases threaten to overwhelm hospitals in Quebec, Ontario, and New Brunswick. Meanwhile, the Prime Minister was hosting a conference call with the premiers on Monday to discuss how to battle this latest phase of the pandemic. COVID-19 cases are threatening to overwhelm hospitals in Quebec, Ontario, and New Brunswick. Ontario is reporting 2,467 COVID patients in hospital, including 438 in intensive care. A new Canada-wide survey finds most Canadians feel equal representation in government is important, but shouldn't be a requirement in the workplace. The poll by the Canadian Hub for Applied and Social Research at the University of Saskatchewan asked if employers should take demographic characteristics into account when hiring or only consider qualified candidates. About 60% of those surveyed said employers should only consider how qualified a candidate is, even if it results in less diversity. But when asked about diversity in government, the vast majority said they support seeing more members of various minority groups in leadership roles. The coroner's inquest into the deaths of almost 4,000 people in Quebec's long-term care homes during the first wave of the pandemic enters its final stage today. It is examining the deaths of elderly and vulnerable people in 7 homes, as well as the government's response to the outbreaks. Seniors Minister Marguerite Blais is set to testify on Friday. About 1,100 businesses and residents in Nova Scotia were still without electricity this morning, almost 3 days after a major winter storm descended on the region. Almost half of the outages are being reported in the Halifax region. Major outages are also being reported in Chester and Digby. The storm dumped about 45 centimeters of snow in some areas of the province. Metrolink says it is cutting back on GO Transit service for the time being because of worker absenteeism. The Crown Corporation says 20 to 30% of the workforce is off because they've been exposed to COVID-19's highly contagious Omicron variant. It also says that number is expected to rise. Metrolink says that starting today, it is reducing service by about 15% across the system. The RBC Capital Markets Canadian Bank CEO Conference takes place today. Leaders of Canada's major banks are scheduled to speak at the virtual event. Banks have come under increasing pressure to commit to net zero carbon emissions targets as activists focus their efforts on the financing behind fossil fuel production. A demonstration against the logging of old-growth forests is expected to disrupt traffic on the Trans-Canada Highway in British Columbia this week. A group called Save Old Growth says they will begin by blocking off ramps multiple times per week, and the frequency and scale of actions will escalate until all old-growth logging is stopped. The protest campaign will begin in Vancouver, Victoria, Nanaimo, and in the BC interior near Revelstoke along Highway 1. A Montreal-based epidemiologist and cardiologist is urging people not to view the current high COVID-19 case counts and hospital admissions as evidence that vaccinations are ineffective. Dr. Christopher Labos says those without COVID-19 immunization are up to 7.4 times more likely to be hospitalized due to the virus. Dr. Bob Bell, a former Ontario Deputy Health Minister and CEO of the University Health Network in Toronto, says Canada, just like every Western country, has a stressed hospital system due to the Omicron variant. Well, plans are underway for Queen Elizabeth's Platinum Jubilee. Buckingham Palace says that on February 6th, Elizabeth II will become the first British monarch to reign for 7 decades. Festivities marking the milestone will culminate in a 4-day weekend of events beginning on June 2nd. This includes a military parade, neighborhood parties, and a competition to create a new dessert. A Manitoba bakery has taken the celebrity-endorsed donut to a whole new level. Valley Bakery in Winkler has launched the Tim Weebs 6-pack, a playful spin on the Tim Hortons Tim Biebs collaboration with pop star Justin Bieber. The bakery reached out on social media to people with the name Tim Weeb, which is a common name in the area, and asked what their favorite donuts are. Their suggestions were put into a six-pack, which will be available until the end of January. All right, we'll be back after the break with more news from across Canada and around the world. We'll start with a look at some of the major events happening around the world, including Russia, the U.S., Iran, and dairy management. An interview with former International Trade Minister Stockwell Day up next. Stay with us. A top Russian diplomat is pressing the United States to ease tensions with Russia over Ukraine. In particular, Russia is demanding NATO promise to stop expanding the alliance's membership and end weapon shipments to the Ukraine. Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Rybkov spoke after his delegation wrapped up roughly 5.5 hours of talks with a U.S. team led by his U.S. counterpart Wendy Sherman. A Russian military buildup of some 100,000 troops along the Ukrainian border has raised concerns in the west of an invasion. This comes as family members of those killed when Iran's military shot down a civilian plane are calling for justice. And Canada's dairy practices are under fire after a trade panel passed a recent decision. Well, joining us now to unpack these issues is the former International Trade Minister, Mr. Stockwell Day. Sir, welcome back to Forum Daily.
Hi, good to be with you.
So let's start with the Russia and NATO conversation first. Sir, where do these two powerhouses stand in these talks?
This is, I think, one of the most challenging times that we've had in a while, because you've got Russia definitely flexing its muscles, and it knows from last time when it invaded Crimea, the U.S. and other countries, they made noises, they called them mean names, and they said they would sanction them, but they basically did nothing, at least in the eyes of Mr. Putin. So now we've got a similar situation. And the concern is that Putin again will say that Ukraine is attacking his forces and that would give them the right to counterattack. And then on the other side of Russia, you've got, as you know, just recently in Kazakhstan, there was, according to Kazakhstan, a threatened coup. And Russia actually, at Kazakhstan's request, sent in thousands of troops. This is very recent, to quell what they said was a coup. So Putin is threatening on both sides. And at the same time, he sort of got the nerve to say, oh, by the way, no more countries are allowed to join NATO. And it's a real test now. My concern is that the U.S. right now is seen as somewhat weak. And the last time there was an invasion, when Russia went into Crimea, very little was done. So I don't know how much President Putin is feeling threatened right now, and that's a concern.
Some very strong demands from Russia, sir. Now, all of this is regarding the Russian military buildup near the Ukrainian border. So let's talk a little bit more about that. What is the situation in Ukraine currently?
Well, Ukraine, of course, has to match the buildup. You can't have enemy forces line up on your border and you do nothing. So as they array their own forces, that could, if Putin wants, that could play into his hand of saying, they are getting ready to attack us. And then what can happen, and this is, we hope it doesn't, but you could even see a staged attack where Russian troops go across the line, artillery near their own Russian troops, claim it's Ukraine, and start an invasion. They've used deception before. Right now, as I was just saying, in Kazakhstan, where there was a concern about a coup, we saw pictures of Kazakh soldiers wearing UN blue army helmets and causing confusion there. So it's highly volatile. The background to all of this, of course, is how tough is Europe going to be when they are in desperate need of natural gas in a frightfully cold winter, natural gas prices going through the roof, which caused the problem in Kazakhstan. And if if they shut down Russia too much, then they lose that natural gas supply, which comes from Russia through Ukraine. So I'm reluctant to say it, but I believe at this time, Mr. Putin is holding more of the cards than Ukraine and its allies are.
Lots to keep our eyes out for, sir. Just about a minute left here, but turning to another issue, Canada's dairy practices are being brought into question, saying that, well, arbitrators are saying that it is inconsistent with the terms of the USMCA free trade deal. So give us some background with this issue too, sir.
Well, the dairy quotas that Canada has been able to maintain for years have been just that. They've been in place for decades. Anytime I was involved with the U.S. in trade talks, they always started the talk by getting mad about the dairy quotas. And so we would sort of let them get mad and their stuff. And then I'd say, well, discussion's over. There's no time. They filed a complaint, filed a panel under the treaty between Canada and the U.S., and it's actually part of the Mexico agreement also. And this time, regardless of what Canadian authorities are saying, the U.S. has seemed to have won a pretty decisive victory. So Canada has until February 3rd to decide how they're going to handle it.
A Montreal-based online radio station says one of its journalists was killed on the job in Haiti on Thursday. Radio Écoute FM says 32-year-old John Weasley Amity was about to conduct an interview with a member of an armed group when he was shot and killed near the capital, Port-au-Prince. The attack has been condemned by media advocacy group Reporters Without Borders. Family members of those killed when Iran's military shot down a passenger jet 2 years ago are demanding that the case go before the International Civil Aviation Organization and for the RCMP to launch a criminal investigation. The Association of Families of Flight PS 752 victims is also calling for arrest warrants and government sanctions against senior Iranian political and military leaders, and for the designation of Iran's paramilitary Revolutionary Guard as a terrorist organization. Nearly 140 of the 176 people killed in the January 8, 2020 incident had ties to Canada, including 55 Canadian citizens and 30 permanent residents. Health experts say the dismissal of the Omicron COVID variant as mild puts millions of people at risk. Dr. Andrew Buzari of Toronto's University Health Network says calling Omicron a cold for the young and healthy is, quote, completely dismissing the reality of millions of people in this country. Palliative care physician Dr. Amit Arya says there isn't enough known about the virus's long-term consequences, so it is completely inaccurate to call Omicron mild. All Canadians are susceptible to COVID-19, but experts say the pandemic has made it very clear who can afford to better protect themselves versus those who cannot. Mississauga, Ontario palliative care physician Dr. Amit Arya says last spring's Delta-driven wave saw essential workers suffer the worst of the COVID-19 infections. Winnipeg epidemiologist Cynthia Carr points out those in lower income groups are less likely to be able to work from home. And they also have a harder time getting access to a test to prove to their employer that they have COVID-19. Canadian Armed Forces members arrived in Bearskin Lake on Sunday. The First Nation in Northern Ontario is in the midst of a massive COVID-19 outbreak. Half of the population of about 400 people has tested positive for the virus. Emergency Preparedness Minister Bill Blair says the soldiers are on the ground to help the community with its response to the outbreak. Quebec is expanding its COVID-19 vaccine booster program as of today to residents 40 and older. The province set a pandemic record of 2,436 patients in hospital with COVID yesterday. Everyone 18 and over will be able to book a booster shot appointment starting next Monday. The First Nation in Alberta says the provincial government is not cooperating with federal legislation that allows them to take control of child welfare services. The Louis Bull tribe had their own law come into place 3 months ago under Bill C-92, which allows First Nations, Inuit, and Métis communities to develop their own welfare laws. Darren Kiwatan, the executive director for the tribe's Child Welfare Society, says Alberta refuses to hand over jurisdiction. Alberta and Ottawa say discussions are ongoing to come to an agreement that best serves families and children in care. The chief of a Yukon First Nation says the significance of an education proposal under consideration beginning this week can't be understated for Indigenous people. In-person voting opens on Tuesday for parents of students at 8 schools on the creation of a First Nations school board with the authority to hire staff, modify school plans, and request that an education program be provided in an Indigenous language. Chief Dana Tisha Tram of the Vuntut Gwitchin First Nation says the proposal offers a chance for innovation in education and bringing Indigenous and non-Indigenous communities together. Meanwhile, search and rescue volunteers in the Halifax area have recently taken on a new role, searching for homeless people in the city on nights when the temperature drops dramatically. This past weekend marked the 7th time volunteers were out on the streets. Armed with a list of locations, volunteers circulate around the city to check parks and alleys wherever people have been living. The team can offer people a lift to a shelter, a blanket, or whatever is needed. The Hungarian immigrant who started what became a global auto parts business in the basement of his home in 1966 has died. Frank Hasenfratz was 86. He built Linamar Corporation into a firm with 26,000 employees in 17 countries. In honor of his accomplishments, Mr. Hasenfratz was appointed to the Order of Canada, named Canadian Entrepreneur of the Year, and was inducted into both the Canadian Manufacturing Hall of Fame and the Canadian Business Hall of Fame. All right, we'll be right back after the break with a look at news from around the world. From sanctions to booster shots to violent protests, we'll be back with top international news stories right after this break. So stay with us. We'll be right back on Forum Daily News. Well, it looks like last year is going into the record books as one of the most expensive for natural disasters. Reinsurance company Munich Re says damage from Hurricane Ida in Louisiana and flash floods in Europe helped put the overall economic losses from natural disasters worldwide at $280 billion. The company says the images of natural disasters in 2021 are disturbing, and it is warning that studies show a link between global warming and extreme weather. Uganda's schools reopened their gates to students on Monday, ending the longest school disruption due to the COVID-19 pandemic anywhere in the world. The East African country first shut down its schools in March 2020, shortly after the first coronavirus case was confirmed on the African continent. Some classes were reopened to students in February 2021, but a total lockdown was imposed again in June as the country faced its first major surge. Foreign ministers from the Middle East's Gulf states are visiting China for meetings this week. The Chinese Foreign Ministry on Monday gave no details of the agendas for the visits. The meetings running through Friday will include the foreign ministers of Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Oman, and Bahrain, along with the Secretary General of the Gulf Cooperation Council. An Iranian foreign ministry spokesman also said Iran's top diplomat would be in China later this week. Mali's military leaders are denouncing new economic sanctions imposed by a regional bloc after the junta pushed back elections by 4 more years. The new measures announced Sunday include the immediate freezing of Mali's assets held in the regional central bank. Air and land borders with 14 other countries in the regional bloc known as ECOWAS have been closed. Kazakhstan's president is describing last week's violent protests against rising fuel prices and the authoritarian government as a terrorist aggression against the country. Officials say nearly 8,000 people were detained by police. This was during protests that saw the worst unrest the former Soviet nation has faced since gaining independence 30 years ago. Today has been declared a day of mourning for the 164 people killed during the violence, including 3 children. Ousted Myanmar leader Aung San Suu Kyi has been sentenced to 4 more years in prison. This comes after a court found her guilty of illegally importing and possessing walkie-talkies and violating coronavirus restrictions. Ms. Suu Kyi was convicted last month on 2 other charges and given a 4-year prison sentence, which was then halved by the head of the military-installed government. About a dozen charges have been brought against the 76-year-old Nobel Peace Prize laureate since the army seized power last February, overthrowing her elected government. Dutch Prime Minister Mark Rutte has embarked on a 4th term. He leads a coalition that took office on Monday after the March 17th election. King Willem-Alexander formally swore in the new government at a socially distanced ceremony. Mr. Ruda has already led 3 coalitions and is now set to become the Netherlands' longest-serving prime minister. The Taliban say they have held talks with senior leaders of an anti-Taliban alliance, a meeting that took place over the weekend in neighboring Iran. The Taliban-appointed foreign minister of Afghanistan released a short video on Monday. It said the alliance leaders were told they could return to Afghanistan and promised their safety would be guaranteed. The alliance, called the National Resistance Front, is led by the son of slain anti-Taliban fighter Ahmed Shah Massoud. New York City Mayor Eric Adams says the death toll in Sunday's high-rise apartment fire could rise. 17 people, including 8 children, died, and Mr. Adams says several people are in critical condition. A malfunctioning electric space heater plugged in to give extra heat on a cold morning is said to have started the fire in the 19-story building. Aid groups say more people will face hunger this year in South Sudan than ever, with more than 8 million affected. That's because of the worst floods in 60 years, as well as conflict and the sluggish implementation of the peace agreement that has denied much of the country basic services. A World Food Program official says 2021 was the worst year since independence, but that 2022 will be worse. Well, it looks like a mega merger Monday in the video game business. Take-Two Interactive, the maker of Grand Theft Auto and Red Dead Redemption, is buying Zynga, the maker of Farmville and Words with Friends, in a cash and stock deal with an enterprise value of about $12.7 billion. All right, I'm Nima Rajan, and that'll do it for your look at national and international news for today. Remember, for more news on demand, you could always visit our website or follow us on our social media handles on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. You could also watch all of our commentary programming on the News Forum YouTube channel. All right, thanks for joining us on the Forum Daily. Take care, Canada. See you next time.